Committee welcomes you all for this Lunch and Learn session, which is about high risk assessment rooms, which is a challenge and an important topic for many of us in all our different roles. So what we're going to do today is we're going to have a presentation from the plan team, which hopefully is going to really help those of you who are having questions about what to do and how to do it in relation to your high risk assessment room. We're going to have a presentation or just information from Frimley Park, who have an accredited room. I'm at the end of that going to give you a little bit of an AC perspective following those two presentations, and then we'd like to encourage you to put as many comments and questions into the chat as you possibly can, because we're here to support you and to make your life easier. And then that's what we're going to move on to at the end, is trying to answer as many of your questions and queries, and also if we can gather any actions from those to take those forward through the plan team. You should be able to see that most of the people that you meet in relation to plan are here at the top. So we've got Tia, Karishma and Cassie, who are all key members of the plan team at the Royal College of Psychiatrists in the CCQI. So I'm going to hand over to that team for their presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. So we're just going to share our presentation to give a bit of an overview of some guidance for high-risk assessment rooms. So just 1 second. Okay, I hope everyone can see that. Today we're going to be looking at the high risk assessment room standard, which is standard 168 in the plan standards currently. We're planning on providing key guidance, some photos of example high risk assessment rooms and some other examples, and some in-depth look into areas of the room. And we're going to hear from Frimley Park Hospital about their high risk assessment room, as Sarah mentioned, which has previously been accredited and also has got some really good innovative features. We're hoping to share their ideas with you guys. Okay, so the first thing to discuss is the plan standard 168, which addresses the high risk assessment room. The standard is the liaison team has access to assessment rooms suitable for conducting high risk assessment. There's a number of guidance points within the standards. I won't read them all out, but these are the areas that we want teams to address when they're making their room or redoing their room or just looking to get accredited. These are the areas that we want teams to look at. Obviously, these are things that we go through with services during the peer review and then during the accreditation process. We currently have quite a low met rate of this standard initially at the first peer review. That's why we're doing this presentation today, to give you some guidance and to hope that give you some tips on how you can improve your room or make sure that it's ready to be plan accredited.
So I will be going through some key guidance to meet the high risk assessment room standard. Some things are pretty straightforward and don't require any sort of additional direction, but some other points are where teams often fail to meet the standard. So I'll go into a bit more detail about those. But the first point we have is be located within the main emergency department. So this is pretty simple. The room just needs to be located in the emergency department. And the second guidance point is have at least one door which opens outwards and is not lockable from the inside. So we recommend that rooms have 2 doors to provide some additional security, and all new assessment rooms must be designed with 2 doors. It's okay for rooms built before 2017 to only have 1 door, but any built after 2017 must have 2 doors to meet the standard. The room must also have a panic button or an alarm system. We often see sort of like strip alarms or some way to raise an alarm unless staff carry alarms with them at all times. And the ceiling in the high risk assessment room also has to be risk assessed. So this comes up quite a lot as well for teams. And during the self-review period, we ask you to provide a risk assessment of the ceiling. For the risk assessment, you need to be aware that of suspended ceilings and drop ceilings. So essentially these are ceilings that have panels in them, because these panels can be lifted up and then someone can crawl through in the space above. So this needs to be risk assessed if you do have a ceiling like that. And then we also ask to see a risk assessment during your self-review. Next slide, please. So the room should also not have any ligature points. So it has to be ligature free, and any doors and door handles must be anti-ligature. So like you can see on the photo on the top right there, there also shouldn't be any sort of closers, door closers, or any wires or pipes or any other items that significantly protrude from the walls. And to note as well, to meet this part of the standard, it's not okay to just say that, you know, patients will always be observed by staff as a way to mitigate these risks. The room just has to have all anti-ligature fittings. There's no way around that. And also, sorry, if you just go back one more. Also, furniture. The room should only include furniture, fittings, and equipment which are unlikely to be used to cause harm or injury to the patient or staff member. So furniture can't be sharp-edged, and they must be heavy-weighted to not cause any harm for the patient, carer, or the staff member. If you have chairs over a sofa as well, we recommend that there are 3 chairs at least, so you have space for a patient, a staff member, and a family member or carer to sit as well. So like in the photo at the bottom on the right, these are the chairs we often see, or sort of those dark blue heavy-weighted ones as well. Next slide, please. The room should also be appropriately decorated to provide a sense of calmness. So this is pretty straightforward, but rooms should be painted with like a relaxing color to provide a calming effect. So whites, blues, greens, things like that. And teams should consider working with patients or carers, representatives to choose direct decorations for the room. Sort of the higher risk assessment rooms that we really take note of are ones that have been sort of decorated with alongside a patient or care representative, so they have input into what the room looks like. Also sort of an obvious point, but the rooms should be clean, and if possible, they should be as spacious as they can be and have good lighting as well. And the rooms should have an observation panel or a window, which allows staff from outside the room to check on the patient or staff member, but which still provides a sufficient degree of privacy. So staff should be able to check into the room from outside through like either an observation panel or a window, but they should be privacy still for the patient and carer. So like in the second picture there, the window on the door has like an adjustable blind. So that's fine as well. And windows can be partially obscured glass as well. Next slide, please. So rounded corner protectors. This is actually a thing that comes up most often when we look at the high risk assessment rooms. So any protruding corners in the rooms, they have to be covered with rounded corner protectors. So the rounded corner protectors must be on the corners to protect the patient, the carers, staff members. They're not there to protect the wall, but they're there to protect the people in the room from harm. So hopefully you can see in the picture, but these are an example of some rounded corner protectors, and these can be purchased online. So all corners in the room must have those on. And as I said, this comes up most often for teams when we look at their high risk assessment room. And next slide, please. So bathrooms, we don't often see bathrooms, so we don't really have any sort of photos of kind of good bathrooms, but this is a photo of sort of what you shouldn't, or what a bathroom shouldn't look like. So like the rest of the room, it should only include furniture, fittings, and equipment which are unlikely to be used to cause harm or injury to the patient or staff member. So it shouldn't be used as like a storage room. There shouldn't be things like chairs in there. Any sort of hand dryers, hand soap, sinks, they should all be anti-ligature with no sharp edges to prevent harm for everyone. Next slide, please. Okay, so yeah, that was the basic guidance for the high risk assessment room standard. We also developed a guidance document, which includes essentially all the information that I just discussed. And this will be sent out to everyone after the lunch and learn. So you have all that information in one piece and will help you when preparing your high risk assessment room for the plan review. But moving on to the room sort of in the context of the plan peer reviews, when you go through your self-review, we'll ask you to complete a self-review checklist. And the checklist is essentially asking you to mark yourself as met or not met against each point in the high risk assessment room standard. So we ask you to mark yourself as met or not met, and also to write a brief sentence as well, explaining why that part of the standard is met or not met. Because writing the sentence, is helpful because it provides some more context that we sometimes can't tell from a video or a photo. So when we go on to peer reviews, at the moment we're having virtual reviews, and the way that we assess the high risk assessment room is through a video. We ask you to take a clear video of the room and sort of talk us through each point. And in a bit, we're going to show a video that Frimley Park Hospital Psychiatric Liaison Service took for their peer review. And it's a really good example of sort of how a video should look, because they went through pretty much every guidance point and pointed out and provided commentary for each part of the standard. The videos are watched by the patient and carer rep, so whoever the representative is on your review team, and a member of the plan team as well. And we mark that against the standard. And then when we go back to face-to-face reviews, we will have a tour of the room. Again, it will usually be a member of the plan team and a patient or carer rep as well. And we mark it against the standard. And we'll also take a video or photo of the room whilst we're there so that we have it when writing the report.
Sorry, it took me a second to unmute myself there. Thanks so much, Tia. So that's obviously just a quick overview of the guidance that we look for, but also with the pictures and things that you can kind of consult as you go through accreditation yourself. We're going, as Tia mentioned, we'll be sharing that document with you, so feel free to refer back to it. In terms of the plan team and our support for you, we, as Sarah mentioned before, we are here to support you during the review process, during the accreditation process, and during the self-review. We are happy to take any queries or questions anytime you want to email us. Feel free to email us at this email address, plan@rcpsych.ac.uk. And just to point out that we are also happy to assist teams where necessary in their reports, where the guidance that we give and recommendations that we give in peer review reports are often used by teams to change things for plan accreditation, but also just to improve the care that they provide. We have previously provided letters from the accreditation committee where necessary towards high risk assessment rooms if it's something that teams are struggling with their services or with the wider trust. And if that's something that's hindering your accreditation, we are here to support in every way that we can, and the recommendations that we give can be passed on to your colleagues as much as you like. So thank you so much for listening to us and for taking on the guidance. Just a quick Knowledge Hub plug. If you want to join our Knowledge Hub, feel free to email us for the address, or feel free to note down this address here. Thanks so much, everyone. We'll be moving on to Frimley Park's, the Frimley Park team's presentation in a minute. I think the team have just rejoined us, so that's great. So I will just be sharing their presentation, and then we'll pass over. Oh, sorry, we'll be first be watching their high risk assessment room video, and then we'll be sharing their presentation. So give me 1 second. Not sure where this video is. Okay, great. Okay, so we'll just be watching Frimley Park's high risk assessment room video, taking us through their room and explaining all of the areas as Tia mentioned in the guidance. So this is just a couple of minutes and then the team will move on to their presentation. Oh, stop sharing.
So the hinges from the doors have been removed and they no longer have hinges. There's no handles on the first door. If we go to the furniture, this is specially weighted furniture that is unable to be lifted. There's 2 chairs and there's a sofa and they have no ligature points at the bottom. We then have the second door, which again, as with the other one, swings both ways, and the handle's been removed on that one, and the catches from the window have been removed, hinges have been removed from the doors. There was a panel here, but this was as per last plan review of the room. The edges were smoothed off because they were sharp. The thermostat was a concern, so a wedge was put over so that it couldn't be used as a ligature point. And that is basically the mental health room. Oh, the ceiling, which I can't reach up to at the moment. The panels, if you push the panels to a certain height, an alarm goes off. So that happens whenever it's pushed. If you look, there's sensors in the ceilings, and then there's a panic alarm as well, which is one there and it works, and there's one on the other side of the room as well.
I'm just going to pass over to the Frimley Park team. I'll just share your slides and then feel free to take it away.
Hello, we're just going to introduce ourselves. So I'm Michelle, Service Manager for Psych Liaison at Frimley Park, and I've got...
Hello, I'm Mina Valance. I'm the Head of Nursing for Specialist Medicine. At the time of doing the assessment, I was covering ED as part of my portfolio as well, which isn't in my portfolio now, but I'm still very supportive of Michelle and the team.
Yeah. So can we have the next slide, please? So the first thing we did, which we thought, which is why I think our room was so successful, is that we engaged our acute hospital. So we've got a very good relationship with the acute hospital anyway. So we gave them as much notice as possible for any changes that might need to be made, and do not leave it to the last minute. So I think that's the most important thing out of everything that we've done, isn't it?
Yeah, I definitely would second that. Just knowing an acute hospital, I'm sure you appreciate how long it takes to get any estates work done, full stop, regardless of the reason. But for this specifically, I really appreciated getting so much notice from Michelle and the team, because it gave us a chance to go through the standards so I could better understand what the actual standard required. It gave us time to link in with the team in ED, so they were fully understanding of what we would need to be doing, and also getting the works arranged because we had to plan that around the capacity, because obviously it meant taking the room out of action for periods of time where we were sorting doors, ceilings and so forth. So having that notice is absolutely key, I would say, from our perspective. It just wouldn't have happened if we had to leave it to lastminute.com.
Could we have the next slide? Thank you. So prior to starting anything, we got the health and safety officer from Surrey and Borders to come and meet with me and Mina, and we did a full ligature assessment of the room and a full assessment of the room, so that anything that was picked out there, we knew what work we needed to be done. that is the first, again, that needs to be done as soon ASAP. So when your reviews are happening, plan that in and book it in, because it is essential. Ideally, like I said, I did do it with the team at Frimley, but ideally you should as well. It would make such a difference.
And again, as Michelle said there, it was really, it definitely helped with my understanding when, say, Jim from the health and safety team was able to join us for that, because then walking through the room, going through the standards one by one, and there were things that I just wouldn't have occurred to me. It was also a good opportunity, even though we know that we haven't reached the standard in other areas of the trust, for us to give more consideration to, especially the ligature risks, so that that's something that we tend to consider much more now in other areas when we're risk assessing rooms, if we have patients, vulnerable patients. So that definitely was a major factor for me, I'd say.
Next, thank you. The work that we carried out was we ensured there was 2 doors in the room. We were lucky anyway. So we needed to make sure that they couldn't be locked and that they could open both ways. We removed all the old furniture that was in there, and Mina ordered some new weighted ligature free from a specialist supplier. Again, that takes a little while to come. So if you're going to ask that to be ordered, and it is expensive, get your trust on board beforehand. We removed the door window blind openers. Gaps within the panels were filled in and smoothed, which I showed you on the video. Sloping caps were placed on the essential thermostat, which couldn't be removed. And no exposed door hinges or closures, and no fixtures or fittings in there that were unnecessary.
So with the doors specifically, I would just say that it hadn't even occurred to me about hinges, in all honesty, and that was something we thought we'd addressed the main issues with the blind openers and so forth, but I really hadn't occurred to me about the hinges. So that took some work, because we literally had to take the doors and turn them around the other way to make sure we didn't have any exposed hinges or door opener thingies at the top. And yeah, the furniture, that definitely did have a lead time for that, and we obtained that. We looked through the catalogue for the specialist furniture for mental health settings, and sort of chose the furniture from there. So there was the odd bits like the thermostat, which we couldn't move, but there we took on board the sort of feedback to make sure that we try to remove any ligature risks from those as well.
So the biggest challenge in that room was there was removable tiles, and if they were removed, there was big beams and metal fittings above, and that was our biggest risk. It would have been just too expensive and impractical to replace the full ceiling. So a motion detection sensor was installed above the tiles. So if the tiles are moved or removed, then the alarm would go off, which can be heard throughout A&E.
And those tiles, it's basically, we've got, as in most settings, the false ceilings. And as Michelle said, if you were to remove those tiles, we removed the tiles so we could see exactly what was above there. And there was a couple of the big beams and a long metal ventilation duct, which we identified that could be a ligature risk if somebody could get something over the top of that beam. Hence the reason for needing to come up with a solution there. We did consider different things. We did look at whether or not we could have sensors below the ceiling, but actually we felt that probably wouldn't work because they'd be visible, and if somebody was determined, they could disarm it, remove it, or whatever. So we wanted something that wasn't visible, hence the reason for going for the motion detector above the tile. So it was set just a couple of inches above the tile. So as Michelle said, if that was moved, it would set off the alarm, and the alarm was based outside the room. We do have the ability to disarm the alarm if there's essential works needs to be done in the ceiling. But yeah, that was the one thing it hadn't even occurred to me. actually. Yeah.
And it was probably the biggest piece of work that we had, because there has been issues in the past where ceiling tiles have been removed, not necessarily from that room, and a patient actually got above the ceiling tiles. This was a few years ago. So it's always been quite evident, but that was the biggest piece of work we did in the room. Also, we were quite mindful that room has no natural light, which a lot of rooms don't have when they're in the middle of ED or in big hospitals. However, I don't know if you saw behind the two chairs, there's like a calming image that's put on the wall, and that gets replaced regularly. So we try to, and it's very calming. There's nothing on there. There's no wording or anything. It's just a calming picture that's placed on there.
Saying, yeah, it has been replaced a few times. When we were deciding on the image for that room, we linked in with Michelle and the team so that we could be mindful of what should be in the image and shouldn't be in the image. So not having necessarily the wording, not necessarily having animals or people. So yeah, we very much went with a very calm scenic view, which does get replaced quite often, because in all honesty, quite often it will be either defaced or it will be peeled off, or sometimes, from a patient perspective, if they're not so keen on the image, they might decide to remove it. So yeah, we do that quite frequently, really. Yeah.
And I think that's it.
Any questions?
And one thing as well,
Oh, sorry, Michelle, I think you've got muted.
it's all right. We were just talking this morning about, obviously with the pandemic, rooms quite important in A&E at the moment, and has been throughout the whole pandemic. So that room does get used for other things as well when we're not using it. So one of the things that we have to do, and we work very closely with A&E, is just keeping on top of it, making sure that it's maintained to that standard. And if there is anything that needs removing or anything's been put in there, that we remove it before we see a patient, because there are times that it's used for other people. So it's just being mindful of that when we go in and assessing the area when we go in and use it.
So I'm sure everyone will appreciate, yeah, how hammered the departments have been, full stop. You'll all appreciate that, being in them yourselves, seeing patients. So yeah, it has to be a sort of space that we can utilise. And during our COVID wave, we've at different times you had to utilise the space within the departments in different ways, which has then meant applying the same rigours of assessment of room when we're having to utilise other spaces as well. So we try and work with the same principles when we're utilising other rooms, because there will be times when there's more than one patient to review. So yeah.
So that's our room.
Thanks so much, both of you. That was really helpful. I hope teams also found that really helpful. Some really good points, and really good to know how you developed the room with the trust as well. And that's a really, really good point. Sarah.
Thank you. So firstly, thanks to Tia for the presentation at the beginning, and thank you so much to Michelle and Mina, and what a fabulous example of collaboration we have in front of us, which I'm sure many liaison teams would be very jealous of. So really appreciate your time, Nina, as well as Michelle's, in sharing things for people today. I've just, as we've gone through, given a few thoughts, and also just to, a lot of the points have been said, and that I'm going to say now have been said already, but I think sitting on the AC, also drawing on the experiences of the liaison team in where I work, and also my role, which is actually in the acute trust. So I'm drawing on all those things, really. So the first thing I would say is engage your acute trust. talk to them, make sure it's clear. We all know that our acute trusts want and value liaison teams input. It's crucial to patients having a good quality experience in ED and also around the rest of the hospital, which is important too. I think the plan ahead message is crucial. And I think drawing on what Mina was saying, reclaiming your rooms. So even if you've passed accreditation in the past and you're going for reaccreditation, we have had a pandemic. We have had lots of hospitals where the liaison rooms have been repurposed, or the estates and maintenance of those rooms has not been of the same quality and standard that it would have been prior to the pandemic. So thinking ahead, planning ahead is crucial. I can't stress enough as well how much the plan team are interested in hearing from you early if you're having difficulties. Do not wait until your peer review visit. Do not wait until you end up coming to the accreditation process, which should really be a sign-off. It shouldn't be a point at which we're trying to tackle these difficult and challenging issues that can arise with high-risk assessment rooms. Get in touch early, seek the support of the plan team so that we can, if you don't have this marvellous relationship that Mina and Michelle's teams and trusts have, you can get our support and our involvement early on in the process. Another thing I'm going to send, and I hope this isn't too controversial, is don't defend a room that isn't compliant. Utilise this standard, and I've put in brackets all of the standards, to drive up quality for your patients. That's what we're all there for. We're there for the patients. And sometimes because it's an accreditation process, it can feel really challenging, but remember that these liaison standards are set by the liaison community. There are over 75 plan member teams. You can all be involved in setting the standards. So the standards are written by you, for you and your patients. They're also impacted by the wider CCQI, which has again over 25 different sets of services that it looks at and supports. And critically, service users and carers are very much involved in how we set our standards at every stage in the journey and how we accredit our as well. So we have 3 service users and carers who sit on the actual accreditation committee. I would say that's roughly about 1/3 of the actual members on that accreditation committee. So the judgments and decisions that are made at the AC are absolutely jointly made by service users and carers. Obviously national guidance, policy and law is in there too. And also one of the things that I've heard before, either when on formal visits or in relation to AC responses, or just in visiting teams around the country in different roles, is when I bring up any things about the high risk assessment room, well that doesn't happen here. We don't have those problems. That's never happened. And of course, the standards are there for preventative reasons too. They're not, we shouldn't be waiting for something bad to happen before we do something positive in an environment to change it. So we're about learning lessons and quality improvement. So it's lessons learned across the whole of liaison that we're trying to draw on in creating the standards that we've created. And so I really can't stress that enough. I think the decor as well, that was another point I wanted to mention. Depressing rooms that are very so sometimes we have rooms that are too light, sometimes we have rooms that are too dark. We all know how frightening being in the emergency department is. So having a room that is comforting and calming and Plain walls are really not necessarily the answer to that, especially if the person is being left in that room for very long periods of time, albeit with supervision overall. And alongside that, linking with service users and carers in influencing what your room looks like. Of course, I'm fully appreciative that one person's beautiful room is another person's horrific room. So, trying to make it right for everybody is probably an absolute impossibility in terms of decor. But evidencing that you have engaged people, I think, is absolutely crucial. So those are my kind of sort of thoughts and summaries of some of the key points alongside what we've heard already. So I know I put a comment in the chat. I probably should have put it in the questions and answers, but I'm going to hand back to the plan team now to just kind of raise the questions and answers and the chat comments that have come up, because I know Cassie's been monitoring all of that as our presentations have been going on. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. We actually haven't had any questions yet, so feel free to post any in the chat, or unless we've covered everything you could possibly want to know, but I don't know if that's the case. Feel free to post anything in the chat that you'd like to know, or in the Q&A function, either for us or for the Frimley Park team or for Sarah. Oh yes, Cassie's also pointed out we had a presentation from an organisation called Hospital Rooms at our last special interest day, and they spoke about environment and how they help to decorate high-risk assessment rooms and how they've been involved with various trusts. So you can access that via the link that Cassie's put if you'd like to watch it. But yes, if there's any questions, feel free to.
I have to say, I didn't expect this to be a quiet session in terms of people's comments. I think we all in kind of preparing it and discussing it expected it actually to be quite a busy chat today. I've certainly put in the chat about beds in high-risk assessment rooms. I think it's a really interesting discussion, and I know Cassie's put back in looking at it from the perspective of the new standards. So the standards are being reviewed. There have been a number of open sessions and opportunities for the sort of liaison teams involved in plan to feedback on them. I think that I think it's Victoria actually who said sometimes I see just a couple of chairs without realizing that sometimes patients are there for hours, and if they want to lie down. Yeah, and yeah, that's I guess that's where I'm coming from. I'm well aware that we have people who are very distressed and maybe waiting for extended periods of time in emergency departments, and thinking about not just the actual assessment but all of the time that somebody spends in the ED, and how we can do a comfortable space for people which is a safe space at the same time is an ongoing question for me. And Victoria's also mentioned the size of the chairs and how comfortable they may or may not be, and thinking about that. So Victoria's one of the carer representatives on the Plan Accreditation Committee. So these are sorts of things that would be raised when we see pictures of the high risk assessment rooms. And I can see there's Jim Bolton, who is a previous chair of the accreditation committee, and saying stick on murals, pull off murals, which have been useful, but they get pulled off. Yes, they do. This is one of the challenges, isn't it? If we have stick-on items in the rooms, is that they will get pulled off, and how safe or unsafe is that? I'll shut up now. I'll let the plan team take over with the.
We've just put, sorry, it's Michelle. We've just put a note in about the mural. Mina's going to find out from the arts team where we get ours from. Yes, they do get pulled off, and then they get replaced. But it's something Frimley Health throughout the hospital. So we'll find out what company they use and the size that it is, because they're the ones that provide it for us. And I will pass that information on.
There's a question from Mariam Alexander about spaces on wards. I don't know if one of the plan team wants to respond to that rather than me. I mean, I can respond to it.
I'm afraid I think my chat's frozen, Sarah, so I can't see what the question is.
Oh, okay. Well, then I'll take the question from Mariam Alexander. Thank you. It's a really important question, Mariam. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Yes, the concept of a magic curtain that protects people from all their private information being shared with a whole bay of patients has been a long-standing and ongoing issue. I think that certainly there is a plan standard about being able to see patients privately. I think this requires a lot of joint working with the acute trust, because I think it's probably highly unlikely that you're going to get a dedicated space, which is a space for you to do that in. But there are, for example, lots of other specialist teams who will input towards who would also want a space where they can privately talk to patients, and also patients would want a private space to talk to them in. So again, it's those linkages with your acute trusts, to think about how you apply the right amount of pressure to ensure that it's prioritised, that you do have spaces on the wards. Some hospitals I know have the luxury of having those private spaces built into all of their wards, and some hospitals, as my own included, very much don't have those spaces. And you know, you walk onto wards and you see vast amounts of equipment sitting in corridors because there isn't even anywhere to store the equipment. And there certainly isn't anywhere to see patients privately either. So yes, it is a standard. Yes, it is an important standard. So yes, we do have a view on it. And my advice is to think about wider groups of specialist services so that you can apply a collective sort of pressure if you're not getting the type of buy-in that you might want from your acute trusts around that.
We've got another question in the Q&A function about whether the assessment room on the bed space within the ED for the patients waiting for the mental health admission. I think Cassie's going to answer.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. So can the assessment room also be the bed space within the ED? So the standard doesn't specify that, and I think that's quite similar to Sarah's question. So in terms of the bed, it's not, we haven't discussed that so much as an AC, but it's definitely something that we need to talk about in the upcoming standards revision. And in terms of more than one assessment room, so it's a really good question. And again, this particular standard is only discussing the high risk assessment room where you would see people, but of course that means it doesn't necessarily take into account if that room is in use, what happens when you have somebody else who may also be deemed high risk or just needs a private assessment room. So that's definitely what we will take back. But it doesn't mean that you can't suggest and work with your acute trust in the meantime about identifying appropriate spaces. And also there are other standards out there, particularly on other networks, but that talk about what appropriate mental health spaces look like, but it's definitely something that we can include in the next edition of standards. And then I can see Michelle has said sort of assessment on ceilings should be done jointly. Yes, and we do specify there should be a risk assessment of the ceiling. Alexa, I hope that's answered your question enough, but it's something that we will take back.
I think I was going to add to that, Kathy, as well, and say, of course, you know, there are often more than one person who's having or presenting with a mental health needs, probably the best way to say it, in an ED at any one time. So it's about the standards are set to ensure that you have a high risk assessment room. You may be using lots of other spaces in the emergency department. Plan doesn't specify the standards for all of those other spaces that you might use, and it doesn't expect all of those other spaces to be single-use spaces, because there is a need for incredible flexibility in the emergency department about what's used and when and for whom. So it's a minimum standard to have a high risk assessment room. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't have other spaces and you shouldn't be involved in specifying what those spaces look like and the design of them. Alexa's probably having a little giggle in the background right now because she knows that we're both in the same trust. Just declare that right now. And it's an ongoing battle, you know, you to be involved. We might need to import more Minas into the world who are always thinking about the mental health patient spaces in their acute hospitals, because I know it is a real challenge for lots of people, ourselves and Alexa included, to be involved when those spaces are planned. And I think there are some things which are about plan, and there are some things which are about the broader issues of, you know, why is there not much more stipulation? We have dementia friendly hospital standards, but we don't have mental health friendly standards for hospitals in exactly the same way. And so we, you know, and plan is not an inspection service, so we'd have to look to the inspection services and national policy to drive that. And of course, if that was there, plan could then map to that. But we'd probably all have a lot more leverage if we had those national inspection or policy standards. But you've got to remember that plan is trying to support liaison services to provide a quality service, and so we're saying as a minimum you must have that high risk assessment room. But of course there are times when that's not the appropriate place to see people based on your assessment of the risk, which is another standard, is how you assess that risk of in relation to a patient's presentation, and whether they do need to be seen in the high risk assessment room or whether actually there's a more appropriate place to assess them within the hospital ED as well.
And sorry, I just wanted to add, so of course a lot, particularly with the high risk assessment room, but of course in your general working, it's all about having that relationship with the acute trust. And
if you're going through the review process, you'll see that we do have a number of standards on them on plan. So one thing that has been ongoing is that plan are now extending, particularly for our online events, free places for acute colleagues to be able to attend. It's something that you can then share with your acute colleagues, but it's a way just of what the network can do to also support with that. And then if they're able to attend these sessions and our events, then hopefully it helps. I'm not saying it's a complete solution, but it helps to have that additional buy-in, because they would also be hopefully benefiting from the network themselves, and then they might understand and get more involved. So that is something that we've done, but in general, the acute trust involvement is also a key area that the advisory group are looking at. So if you do have suggestions on what the network could do, but those are things that we're also implementing to support all of our members.
Thanks, Cassie and Sarah. I don't think there's any other questions at the moment. If anyone has any last minute questions, feel free to pop them in the chat, but if not, thank you so much for joining, and we hope that you took something away from all of the people that you heard from today, and also from the Frimley Park team's video, especially. Sarah, I don't know if you've got any closing comments.
Just to say thank you very much to everybody who joined. Thank you to Tia, Karishma and Cassie for providing us with this session and for their presentation, and to Michelle and Mina at Frimley Park for giving us their time and their insights into their high-risk assessment rooms and the processes that they've gone through. So thank you everybody very, very much.
Thanks so much, everyone. Feel free to email us if you have any other questions, or if you have any questions for anyone that you've heard from today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.